everyone, Ogre27 Kane here today, and we're going to do our top 10 Castlevanias for the Nintendo Switch. Now this will contain the Castlevania Anniversary Collection as well as the Castlevania Advance Collection. First up, the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. Now this contains Castlevania 1, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, Castlevania 4 Super Castlevania, Castlevania The Adventure on Game Boy, Castlevania The Adventure 2 Belmont's Revenge, and lastly Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis. This will not include Kid Dracula because I don't really consider that much of a Castlevania game, but it does have some cool extras as well as a Japanese version. Now the Advanced Collection contains the Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, as well as Aria of Sorrow, and lastly, the Castlevania Dracula X. That's right, the old Super Nintendo release. This also has a few extras as well as a gallery, a music player, and a Japanese switcheroo if you'd like to too. But let's jump in and talk about the first game on our list. So first up, we're going to start out our list at number 10 with Castlevania The Adventure for the Game Boy. This game came to us all the way back in 1989 and I hardly remember it. I was too busy playing Zelda and Final Fantasy Adventure, and a few other games like that to really get into this. I've only since really got to play this on this collection here, and I'm not really honestly a fan. I was kind of on the fence on which to put in what order, this one or Belmont's Revenge, so I included them both essentially at the 10 spot. This one being 10 and Belmont's Revenge is slightly better at 9.5. Go ahead and let me know in the comments what you think, which one's better to you. I don't really have any nostalgia, and frankly for a game like this, that's really what you'd need. So let's jump into 9.5, speaking of the devil. So here we have Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, and as you can see it has a stage select screen and a few other minor upgrades. The speed and momentum of your character is slightly increased, ever so slightly, but just enough to notice a little bit over the frustration from the first one. The level design is a little confusing in this one. It's a little bit closer to what you consider a Metroidvania, without really truly having all those elements. The game does do a better job at showing the environment off and utilizing the strengths and weaknesses of the Game Boy. I didn't mind this game as much, I didn't get nearly as far in either of these games, but if I had to choose between the two of them, this one would probably be the one I would go with. So let's move on now to number 9, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. So I'll be honest with you, out of all the NES games I played growing up, this is the one game that I never bothered to get anywhere in. I know a lot of people liked it, and a lot of people compared it to The Legend of Zelda 2 Link's Adventure, but it's really not even close to that. This game has a lot of really clunky mechanics and a lot of really obscure hidden puzzles. You need the internet to play and beat this game. I don't know how anyone ever did back in the day. It's not to say that it's a bad game per se, but it's definitely a game that needs to grow on you and you need to be familiar with before you really get into it. The time and investment this one takes over all the other Castlevania games is honestly pretty impressive. I didn't really think that they could do much like this, but I mean, then again, the NES was pretty unique in a lot of the really cool features they put in there. The game does have a day and night cycle, it does have certain upgrades and weapons and items you can find, as well as towns to visit, on a fairly large map. I just wish that it was a little less obscure and some of the details and some of these hidden things were a little more in the open. You're supposed to be able to go to the townspeople and get these hints and whatnot to figure out what to do, but frankly folks, none of these hints ever made sense and the game never really clearly told me what I needed to be doing. I really like this game for the soundtrack and it is pretty awesome. It's got one of the best ones on the NES, but I just frankly can't stomach playing it all the way through anymore. So I think we should move on now to our next game. So next coming in at our number 8 spot, we have Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse for the NES. This game, once again, was a step up from what they had done with Castlevania 2 in terms of the gameplay and in terms of how everything worked in mechanics. Now, it was kind of a step down in terms of the world building to some people because a lot of people liked that freedom that the second one gave you. Personally, I like the third one a little bit more. I like the way that they variated the world by changing the pathways in which you take. That way it's almost static, you can kind of direct yourself a little easier and figure out what you missed and what you didn't miss. But on top of that, it does kind of take away some of that element. I also don't have nearly as much nostalgia with this game as I do, say, Castlevania 1, because I never actually owned this one on the NES. And from what I remember growing up, this one was a little rarer because it came out closer to the launch of the Super Nintendo. And by that point, everybody was moving on and talking about all the cool new stuff, and this game definitely just slipped through the cracks for me. Now, going back to it and enjoying it for this this top 10 list, I really did start to enjoy some of the elements to it, but the movement is still really clunky, and the game punishes you for one tiny little misstep. This was a little frustrating and a little annoying to me, folks, but it certainly was an upgrade from the second one for me. So let's move on to number 7 now, Castlevania 1. So finishing up our NES games is Castlevania 1. And this game for me has a ton of nostalgia. Growing up with this game, this is one of the first NES games I played, and probably the one that gives me the best feeling of accomplishment. Yes, I beat Legend of Zelda 1 and 2, and I beat some other really difficult games, but this game really gave me that true feeling of, wow, this is what video games can do in terms of impact to my own emotional state. They can make or break me. And I mean that. This game was so frustrating that it took me years to complete. Years. But once I did, it locked this game in my memory. Yeah, this game's not a little higher on the list because frankly, the movement and control in this game just utterly sucks. It's on the same level as the other two on the NES, but it is the best of the three in my opinion, just out of sheer nostalgia and sheer memory alone. It's really hard to go back and compare these games today, especially to a lot of their later versions, I should say. Some of the remakes, essentially, with what you'll find with Castlevania 4 and Castlevania Bloodlines, are a little better in offering the same material and content, but if you have some nostalgia, then they're worth going back to, and remember that this is kind of what gave us the concept of a difficult game back in the day. These were the original Dark Souls, if you will, of what difficulty was, and defeating one of these old NES games was a triumph in itself, so if nothing else, check it out. So let's move on now to number 6, Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. Now this game actually came out after Super Castlevania 4, which is crazy to even think about in my mind, because this game is a huge step down from Castlevania 4. It's a big step up from the original NES Castlevanias, and having a little bit more ability with your movement, as you can see, is definitely a huge advantage. You also have better sub-weapons, and you have a little more controls on the stairs itself. But the game still kind of functions like an NES game, and although being absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, that doesn't negate some of the issues and errors we had with it. Now, I did get the chance to play this back in the day on the Super Nintendo, and I always did think the game was absolutely beautiful, but that doesn't have anything to do with the controls or wonkiness, especially moving from Castlevania 4 that we saw. The last thing I really want to say about this is it is really cool to go back and see what was the predecessor to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and if you're familiar with that game at all, this game shows off a lot of the prior details and actually ends where that game begins. So, if nothing else alone and you really like that game, go back and check this one out because it will give you a slight feeling of adventure. I don't really have anything else positive to say about this game because it is really frustrating and the issues that are in it are big. But let's move on now and let's talk about our next game. Number 5, Castlevania Bloodlines from the Sega Genesis. So this game features 2 playable characters with John Morris and Eric Lecarde. This game is almost a remake of Castlevania 1, being very similar to Castlevania 4, but almost like it was Sega's take on it. It's still a really good game, but it's a different game, and it's not really one that I have much nostalgia for. Being the age that I was, I could only afford one console at a time, and I had a Super Nintendo, so I did not play this game at all back in the day. Kinda regret that now because it's a really fun game, and after playing it for this top 10, I really enjoyed it. No, I didn't finish it all the way as the game is really difficult, but it still features a lot of good things from the Castlevania universe, and it has a decent set of control. Your whip has a momentum to it, but at the same time is still a little bit more controllable than it is in Dracula X. No, it doesn't have the cool features that you have in Castlevania 4, but it still does some neat things as well as being able to whip onto ceilings and pull yourself up to things. Some of the other cool things that this game has is the boss environments themselves, as you can see here, are absolutely beautiful. There were times that I found myself not even fighting the boss. I just kind of stopped and stared off into it. So, if you have any nostalgia for this game, it's worth going back to and checking out again. For me personally, it's a first-time adventure, and one that I'll probably actually finish and play all the way through 100%. So let's move on to number 4 now. So here at number 4 we have Castlevania Circle of the Moon, and this was a fantastic Game Boy Advance title. Being the first one of the 3 that came out on the system, I probably played this one through the most. Being as it was kind of limited at the time in the library, I didn't really have a lot of good options like it, so it grew on me. Now, there are some frustrating features to this game that really don't make any sense to me. First up, we have the movement, and the movement on this game is really annoying at first. As you can see, you have a walking speed for the first 15-20 minutes of the game. And it's really annoying. It could be a turnoff to a lot of people who really didn't take the 10 to 15 minutes to get to the first upgrade. These dash boots. The problem with the dash boots, though, is that you have to double tap a button to run, so there's no way to really just keep your momentum and run around. Yes, they did fix this in the later 2 entries, but this version alone makes it really frustrating. It's almost slower than the original Castlevania's movement and momentum. That one thing really put this down on the list for me and affected it greatly. But that doesn't really have much to do in terms of how the art style is, if you're really a fan on that, and the game really does have a great Castlevania aesthetic. It really pushes itself to show you what we really wanted to see after a Symphony of the Night. The double jump, as you can tell, is right here, which is one of my favorites of all time, and it's still worth going back to today. So let's move on now to our number 3 spot, Castlevania 4, Super Castlevania. So once again, I have my nostalgia goggles on for this one. Going back to it, it's probably not better than Circle of the Moon, but it is to me personally. I love this game. This was one of my first Super Nintendo games, and I played this game over and over and over. Having the ability to have a password system and continue wherever I wanted was huge in this game. It gave me the ability to finally get through my first Castlevania. Yes, I have beaten the NES one a few times, but this was the first Castlevania game I actually completed on my own. Not only that, I did it with my brothers and my dad, which gives it a lot more meaning to me. This game was not really something that I really wanted to invest time in when it first came out, as I had a lot more fun with Super Mario World and Pilot Wings, but going back to it, I really did enjoy it, and thinking about it while making this top 10 really put into perspective to me some of the better and more unique features to a Castlevania. Having your whip being able to go in diagonal directions and control the movement as you're flailing it about was actually a huge plus for me, because I usually got killed by the stupid little birds and the tiny little creatures that are impossible to hit. When you have to run up against something like a Fleaman over and over and over, it can become one of the most frustrating enemies in any Castlevania. So, let's go ahead and move on now to our number 2 spot. So as we get closer and closer to the end of this list, it really was a struggle for me to decide which was going to be the number 2 and the number 1 spot. I ended up with Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance in the number 2 spot, just out of a few weird little things on its own. One of the things that really did kind of annoy me about this game is you have an outline around your character, a little blue outline. And it's there because back in the day, the old Game Boy screens weren't backlit, and it was really hard to see your character against the screen itself unless you were directly under sunlight. They did this as a feature to help us out, but now looking at it, I think it makes the character look a little ugly and kind of doesn't help their character model at all. It almost makes them look unorganic to the rest of the background in the game itself. It's just a minor aesthetic detail, but it's one that always kind of bothered me, especially after playing Aria of Sorrow, which has more of a red outline, and that outline didn't really affect my eyesight quite as much. It's a big contrast between those two colors when you're looking at it under the sunlight, and for some reason my eye just didn't respond well to the blue. That being said, the game is absolutely fantastic and has a ton of combat options. It also has a lot of really cool options as far as how you use your magics and how you equip things. The card system in Circle of the Moon was really cool, but I like the way that this game did things. On top of that, your whip grows in strength in this, and so you actually feel a connection to how Vampire Killer works. Aria of Sorrow doesn't really have that feature. But moving on now, we're going to talk about our number 1 game. Alright, well we're going to finish up this list with our favorite Castlevania, probably of all time, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. Now, in my opinion, this one and Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow kind of go back and forth, but not having the annoying touchscreen things and features that one has really kind of puts this game over it for me. This game has a lot of really cool things to it, as well as it features all of the different unique things from all the Castlevanias before it, and is frankly probably better than all of them after it. This was really a labor of love, and you could tell that they really put a lot of passion, time, and effort into it. The world is huge, there are multiple endings, and having so many different variations of weapons and magic really make this. Every single enemy in this game drops a soul, and each one of those souls have a different unique feature to it. So putting them in combination in tandem really changes the game and really employs a lot of unique strategies. I love the enemy variants, and I love all the bosses in this game. This is definitely one of the coolest games I've ever played, and I absolutely love the fact that they brought this back to us. Having it physically again on the Nintendo Switch has brought me so much fun and nostalgia, I can't even begin to explain how much I love this game. Well, that's going to do it for today's list. Thank you for watching this video. It was a blast to make. I upload every single Monday. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And have a great rest of your day. This is Ogre27 Kane, signing out.